Hello, my name is Sherman II of SoulPreaching.com. Here we are talking about sermon errors. So number 9 is theoretical point, only theoretical point. Sometimes we as preachers split up doctrinal from practical sermons. We think sometimes we must preach about the Trinity. Sometimes we preach about the deity of Christ, humanity, and the atonement of Christ, cross. We think sometimes we are called to preach doctrinal sermons, and sometimes we are called to preach practical sermons, which is you can make it, how to get along with spouse, how to be a better man or woman. We see this dichotomy between doctrinal and practical sermons. Sometimes we got to preach practical, sometimes we got to preach doctrinal. It becomes a challenge for us to determine when do we preach practical, when do we preach doctrinal. It is my contention that this dichotomy is what is at the root of our lack of doctrinal preaching, because we think that it is important to be practical. It's important for people to leave knowing how we're going to live the principles that has been presented in this sermon in our daily lives. That's very important, and because of that, we kind of look down on or set aside these doctrinal sermons. So what happens is that we lose the doctrines. We don't know them anymore. We lose an understanding of these doctrines. Now, sometimes some preachers come along, and because of this, now this is one error, to only preach this and not preach this. Some preachers come along and say, hey, I gotta come and I gotta preach this, so I'm gonna preach about Christ's humanity today. I don't care whether you think it's practical or not. You need to know it. That is what I'm talking about, is an only theoretical point. It's important to take these doctrines, if you're going to preach them, and apply them in such a way that people can make them relevant to their daily lives. Henry Mitchell says that if the doctrine cannot be made relevant to our daily lives, then maybe we shouldn't even be teaching it. It is my contention that good doctrine will always translate into better living, better practical living. You ain't done as a preacher when you just say something is true. This is true, you better believe it. You ain't done. You ain't done until the people have some idea of how to translate that into their daily living. What does the Trinity mean for daily living? What does the way that the Godhead works together harmoniously, does that have something to say to us today in our disharmonious world? What about the humanity of Christ, the one who was in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin? Does that have something to say to those of us who are in the midst of a temptation right now, wondering if there is somebody to help us, knowing if we knew that there was somebody on the throne right now who was ready and able and willing, who knew exactly how much grace is needed to help us to overcome the sin that we have found ourselves fighting with, knows exactly how much it is, because that same one took the same flesh that we have. the humanity of Christ, does that matter? The atonement of Christ, what in the world difference does that make? The cross of Christ, how does the cross make a difference for my daily living? Does Jesus saying something about take up your cross and follow me, what in the world does that make? The important point I'm making is that this sermon error of only doing the theoretical has a good impulse because it's seeking to help us to understand the doctrine, but it has the incorrect impulse of not moving us into knowing how to actually make that doctrine effective and important in our daily living. So I would encourage you to do both in our living, and then we're ready to move to the next step in our preaching. You must preach doctrinal sermons. Just make them practical in the presentation. Until next time, this is Sherman A. Wilcox II of SoulPreaching.com. God bless you and keep on preaching.